Dr. Malcolm Taylor stood tall as he walked into Mercy Hospital for his first day as the new chief surgeon. His credentials were unmatched: graduated top of his class from Harvard Medical School, completed residencies at some of the world's most prestigious hospitals, and had more surgical success stories than anyone on staff. Yet, as he entered the hospital, he felt the weight of stares on him, whispers behind his back, and the unspoken tension in the air. It wasn't the kind of welcome he had expected, especially not from a modern hospital in the heart of New York City. He had faced racism before, of course, throughout his career. But this was different, more insidious. It wasn't just the offhand remarks or the subtle exclusion from certain conversations. It was a coldness, a collective decision by some staff to undermine him from the very beginning. In the operating room, the tension was palpable. Nurses would glance at each other with raised eyebrows whenever he gave instructions, and junior doctors hesitated before following his lead. Some even questioned his decisions, despite his expertise. Dr. Taylor remained calm, knowing that the best way to silence his detractors was through excellence. One day, during a critical heart surgery, a nurse deliberately forgot to prepare an essential tool he had requested. The delay could have cost the patient their life, but Dr. Taylor's quick thinking saved the situation. After the surgery, when he confronted the nurse, she rolled her eyes. "You think you can just waltz in here and tell us all how to do our jobs? Just because you're the chief surgeon doesn't mean we have to respect you," she sneered. Another doctor, Dr. Reynolds, made no secret of his disdain. "It's funny how affirmative action works," he said loudly in the doctor's lounge one day. "Some people get their positions not because they're the best, but because hospitals need to tick diversity boxes." Dr. Taylor clenched his fists under the table but refused to let them see him break. He had worked too hard to let their ignorance tear him down. But it wasn't just about him. There were other minority staff members who looked up to him, hoping he would pave the way for more equality. Things escalated one afternoon when Dr. Taylor's office door was spray-painted with racial slurs. The graffiti was vile, hurtful, and designed to break his spirit. A few colleagues, those who had stayed silent in the face of the racism, looked at him with pity, but none offered to help clean it up. The hospital administration seemed to be turning a blind eye, letting the tension fester. Dr. Taylor knew he needed to act. He drafted a formal complaint, detailing the incidents of racism, the deliberate sabotage in the operating room, and the hostile work environment. He sent it to the hospital's administration, unsure of what the response would be. Would they sweep it under the rug as so many institutions had done before? Days passed without a word. The whispers grew louder. Some speculated that Dr. Taylor would be forced to resign, that he was stirring the pot too much. Others thought the hospital would side with its majority staff, pushing him out quietly to avoid scandal. But then, a week later, the hospital board called an emergency meeting. Every department head, senior surgeon, and administrative official was summoned. Dr. Taylor sat in the back of the room, watching as the board's chairperson, a stern but fair woman named Ms. Hawthorne, stood at the podium. "We have received a serious complaint regarding the conduct of certain staff members at this hospital," she began, her voice cold and sharp. "Racism has no place within the walls of Mercy Hospital. We are an institution of healing, not hatred." There was a murmur in the room, and Dr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ms. Hawthorne continued, "An internal investigation has confirmed that Dr. Taylor has been subjected to unacceptable and unethical behavior by several of his colleagues. Effective immediately, those found guilty of racist actions or words will be terminated from their positions." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Heads turned, eyes wide in disbelief. No one had expected such a strong response from the administration. Hospitals rarely took such decisive action against racism, and the staff had assumed their behavior would go unpunished. "The individuals involved will be escorted out of the building today," Ms. Hawthorne concluded. "Furthermore, this hospital will be implementing mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all staff to ensure that such behavior never occurs again." As security officers entered the room to remove those responsible, including Dr. Reynolds, the air felt different, lighter, cleaner. The staff who had once sneered at Dr. Taylor were now silent, avoiding his gaze as if ashamed of their own complicity. Dr. Taylor stood up, his heart pounding. For the first time since arriving at Mercy Hospital, he felt the weight lift off his shoulders. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a message had been sent. Racism, no matter how deeply ingrained, would not be tolerated. But even as Dr. Taylor walked out of the boardroom, the stares persisted. People still whispered, albeit more cautiously now. The hospital may have taken action, but the deep-rooted biases of some staff remained. Dr. Taylor knew this battle wasn't over. His victory today was only the beginning of a long uphill struggle. But he was ready. He had faced worse and survived. Now, with the hospital administration behind him, he had the power to fight not just for himself, but for every minority who had ever been underestimated, belittled, or overlooked because of the color of their skin. And in the end, that fight would be his greatest legacy. Dr. Taylor's sense of relief was fleeting. Despite the swift action taken by the hospital administration, the aftermath of the scandal left him with a bittersweet feeling. His colleagues' hostility had shifted, but it wasn't replaced by acceptance. Instead, it had morphed into something else. Fear. Fear that they too could be punished if they stepped out of line. Fear that, as long as Dr. Taylor was in the hospital, their every word and action would be scrutinized. He wasn't blind to the change. Conversations that once flowed openly around him now fell silent as he entered a room. The hospital halls echoed with muted voices, and people he once considered potential allies now averted their eyes. He had won a battle, but the war against prejudice was far from over. One day, while reviewing patient charts in his office, Dr. Taylor received a knock at the door. It was Ms. Hawthorne, the board chairwoman, who had led the charge against the racist staff members. She entered, closing the door behind her, and sat down across from him. "Malcolm, I wanted to check in," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard. "I know things have been difficult, even after the decisions we made." Dr. Taylor leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "It's been quieter, but I know what's still there, beneath the surface." Ms. Hawthorne nodded. "Change doesn't happen overnight. The hospital is taking steps, but I also know that true progress takes time. I want you to know that you're not alone in this." Dr. Taylor appreciated her words, but he had heard promises like this before. He thanked her, but inside he knew the road ahead would be long and lonely. Weeks passed, and though the worst offenders had been removed, subtle microaggressions persisted. One day, during a routine surgery, Dr. Taylor noticed that a new junior surgeon, Dr. Bennett, seemed unusually tense. She hesitated to follow his instructions and often sought the opinion of other doctors in the room, despite his authority. After the surgery, Dr. Taylor pulled her aside. "Is there something bothering you, Dr. Bennett?" She looked flustered, glancing around nervously. It's not that. Just what?" Dr. Taylor asked, keeping his voice calm but firm. "I've heard things from some of the staff about you. I didn't want to get involved, but..." She paused, then took a deep breath. "Some people still think you don't belong here. They think you're just waiting to catch them in a mistake so you can report them." Dr. Taylor sighed. It was exactly what he feared. Despite the hospital's stance, some staff continued to undermine him, albeit in more covert ways. "Dr. Bennett," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I'm here to save lives, just like you. I'm not interested in playing games or reporting people unless their actions put patients at risk. You can either trust me or you can continue to listen to rumors. But I can tell you this, none of those rumors will help you become a better doctor." She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean..." "It's all right, Doctor," Taylor interrupted gently. "Just focus on the work. That's what matters." Some younger staff, like Dr. Bennett, saw Dr. Taylor as a skilled, compassionate leader. He gained the trust of those who gave him a chance, and the whispers stopped. But Dr. Taylor knew some would never accept him. Under his leadership, Mercy Hospital became a respected surgical center. Dr. Taylor's story inspired other minority doctors and medical professionals to overcome racism. But there were always new battles. A comment here, an exclusion there. Dr. Taylor knew that fighting racism wasn't a one-time thing. It was a lifelong commitment. Some people agreed, but many refused to change. One evening, he looked out over the city from his office window and realized something. He wasn't trying to change everyone. He couldn't. He was fighting to make it easier for the next generation of doctors. Doctors who wouldn't have to face the same struggles he did. Doctors who could walk into an operating room and be judged by their skill, not the color of their skin. That was enough for Dr. Taylor.